What is going on, y'all? I'm KM Best. The Marvel Snap devs just nerfed my favorite card in the game and my least favorite card in the game, alongside a host of other changes. Let's get into it. My least favorite card in the game, that'd be Galactus. And of course, here we start with the good news before getting to the bad news. Galactus going from a 6/7 to a 6/5, keeping the same effect. Now, one of the things that they noted was that Galactus's performance had gone over the level that they otherwise would like it to be at. They felt like Galactus was at the appropriate space before Alioth came out. Now, to me, my first thought was then, okay, well, if you thought Galactus was appropriately powerful before Alioth came out, why'd you make Alioth? And the thought process there, I think, is something more along the lines of they want a priority type finisher that can go in decks that play for priority, that play to the board, and be a game-ending card, sort of like Old Arrow or Old Leader, but way worse, right? And Alioth is, in almost every context, not as game-winning as Arrow or Leader used to be, but the one context in which that is not true is Galactus. In Galactus, he is absolutely a million times more game-winning than basically any other card. He's replaced Null, he's replaced everything, he's not vulnerable to anything, he always works, he's just an absolute hard lock in the Galactus deck, and I think that is what they wanted to target. I don't think they see an issue with Alioth in decks like Move Wave or High Evo, but specifically Galactus makes him the exact sort of Leader Arrow-esque design that they were looking to avoid with the card, so specifically Galactus seems to be getting toned down. As far as my opinion on this, 2 thumbs up. I hate playing against Galactus decks. I just do not enjoy it. I think most of the community will be very happy to see this nerf. Honestly, I am a big fan of Galactus taking a bit more of a hit. Like, the less Galactus I ever have to deal with, the better it is for me. I do hope that going to 6/5 means that there are more decks that can reasonably contest all of the lanes into a Galactus, because there have been a ton of Galactuses on ladder, and I gotta say, I have not enjoyed it one bit, so good change here. Now the bad news. Cue the Celine Dion, because also losing 2 power is Kitty Pryde. And my heart, it honestly might not go on. Because Kitty Pryde has been basically my favorite card in the game since she was released. I loved her before they removed her from the game. I loved her after she came back into the game. I have loved her undoubtedly the entire time with true devotion. I've played probably more Kitty Pryde decks than any other type of deck. I got the Spotlight variant and everything. And now I really don't know where she goes from here. Because as a 1/0, it's another one of their things that they do when balancing a lot is take the bottom off while leaving the top on, right? So here they took the bottom off. Now Kitty's a 1/0. She's absolute trash if you don't get her very early. So it's like increasing the variance of running the card, because now it's more important, say, if you're doing something like Kitty Shuri, to get exactly, you know, Forge Kitty, Hulkbuster Kitty, Shuri Kitty, or she's just kind of completely worthless. It's more important to have her with Angela now. It's more important to have the complementary cards with her, and she's less of a carry on her own. I'd go so far as to say she's not great at this stat line. Like, I'm sure she'll be around. Sunspot is still around. Sunspot has homes. Kitty will find homes mostly alongside Angela, I would expect, but it's definitely a significant hit to her, and I really do wonder what decks she actually does make sense in. My first instinct is that Shuri Kitty just sort of immediately dies. Like, that is a deck that is trying to multiply power cannot really handle that kind of a nerf to the thing it's trying to multiply power on, so I would expect more Sauron-style Shuri decks in the future. One thing that I'm not sure on, though, is what Loki will do with this kind of card, because I think Loki already was kind of just using it as a way to, like, spin the wheels and sometimes be relevant. It wasn't really your plan A, and it's still a card that, you know, you can invest into while not being committed to, meaning you can be playing kitties, but then decide, all right, it's time for these kitties to turn into something else with Loki. And that seems like the most optimal place for a card like this now. I feel like she's gone from being a true build-around to something that is going to have to take a more complementary role in the decks that she goes in. Here's a fun and likely underrated change. Psylocke going from 1 power to 2 power. And I think that this kind of change is a welcome one to me personally, because I've always been out on Psylocke as a 2-1 basically all of the time, except in very specific Thanos lists. As a 2-2, she's just so much more defensible. She's so much more reasonable of a card. And I know it sounds like, oh, well, it's only 1 power, right? But it's also doubling her power. If you think about it in the context of, yeah, her power doubled here, I can see this card actually being worth exploring in shells other than what she's currently seen. And at the bare minimum, it makes her a more compelling card to play if you're trying to accelerate into multiple 5-drops in like normal decks. Like, this is actually suddenly like a pretty reasonable 2-cost card if you're going to be doing something really critical with the energy, right? Like, this into Professor X is now actually kind of compelling, right? Like, it's actually a very solid card now. Play it on turn 3, you Professor X, like, it's not that far removed from a Time Stone. It's something that can go into different decks than Thanos, though, and adding that kind of turn 4 Prof X scam to other decks is pretty compelling to me personally, and it's definitely the kind of change that will lead to me experimenting with that kind of playstyle. Other 5-cost cards and 4-cost cards you could accelerate out. I mean, of course, Mr. Negative already plays her. I'm interested to see if she goes in any Zabu decks for when you don't draw Zabu. Now, as a 2-2, she's way more reasonable at doing that. She's still half a Zabu because she doesn't let you play 2 4s on 6, but half a Zabu ain't bad. It's something that's definitely worth considering. So I'm interested to see what Psylocke's future holds here, because now she's a reasonable card who has a reasonable body for what she does. And I honestly sort of feel like maybe she should have been at this stat line the entire time. I gotta tell you, I never saw this one coming. Every so often they just throw a change in there to like a Series 1 card that I had no way of predicting whatsoever. In this patch, that change is Squirrel Girl gaining a power. Her ability, of course, stays the same, but hey, look, she goes to a 1-2. This is a reasonable buff to a card that's actually quite powerful in earlier pools. She is now effectively a 1-4 in certain decks, and I do want to call out that next month, the card Elsa Bloodstone will come out. She's a 2-cost card that has the text that says, when you play a card to fill up a location, think the raft, that card gets +3 power. So in combination with the Kitty Pride thing, I think the Kitty Pride one and this are both sort of forward-facing. This is a card that can easily start to get you to the point where you're filling up locations, and of course, Kitty Pride can repeatedly get those buffs. I'm interested to see what Elsa Bloodstone does. I'm interested to see what Elsa Bloodstone does, not just with Squirrel Girl, but also with Kitty Pride. There might be a real Elsa Zoo type deck out there with Kitty repeatedly gaining that +3 from being played on a full location. It seems like the kind of thing you could do. I'm definitely interested to see what that ends up looking like. I'm sad they preemptively nerfed Kitty, especially after we had Glenn on the podcast and he was like, we don't really preemptively nerf stuff. They definitely preemptively nerfed her here. That definitely happened. I refuse to believe otherwise, but Squirrel Girl could be a reasonable supporting piece of some sort of Elsa Bloodstone Kitty type deck to make sure that your locations actually get filled up as early as possible so you can keep doing that Kitty Elsa dance. Last up, Snowguard is getting a change after being released in her new form and basically immediately slotting into the best deck in the game, Loki. They have taken a look and they've said, all right, look, people are not really playing Snowguard for her animals, and that means we don't need to aggressively cost them. If they're mostly going to be cards that are getting thrown away, we can see what else we can do with what their costs are, especially in light of, Quinjet existing, right? Since she's often going in decks with Quinjet, they often end up being maybe a little bit too aggressively costed for what they are. So first up, the bear is going to 3/4, 3 cost, 4 power, and keeping the same effect. And the hawk is going to 3/3. Now, they are doing this mostly to reflect the a pretty undeniable fact that the hawk is almost always a little bit more useful than the bear, despite the shortcomings that the hawk has. The bear is usually useful when there's like a location that puts units on the board and you want to clog your opponent with it, or maybe you empty your hand and try to get an extra discard off of a Sokovia, but most of the time the hawk is going to be the one that is doing the heavy lifting for Snowguard, so the bear is the one that gets the extra stats. As far as my opinion on this specific change, I guess I kind of don't understand it a little bit, because it's like, all right, everyone's playing this card in Loki, so we make it worse, so everyone will play it elsewhere. It doesn't really track to me, but I'm willing to wait and see on this one. Overall, I think one thing that people are going to be surprised by in this patch is that they haven't done anything to Loki, and I think before Mobius came out, or even the first day of Mobius's release, I would have been surprised as well. But after Mobius has started to stabilize, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt here and say, okay, let's take a break. Loki is now no longer the only playable thing at High Infinite. I can at least admit that much, so maybe Mobius did enough to get the metagame moving such that Loki is no longer absolutely oppressive, and thank God for that, because I did not want to make another Loki video. So I do think there is a little bit of a potential bad look here, though. Instead of nerfing Loki and Alioth, they nerfed Galactus and Snowguard and Kitty, right? They nerfed the cards that are not the new shiny thing. Now, I do think that, for the most part, I buy their reasoning for doing that. I don't think it's necessarily profit-related. I know there are going to be people in the comments who are going to see this and be like, oh, Cam, you naive moron. They're obviously not nerfing the new cards because it's new and good, and they're definitely going to nerf it later. And, you know, maybe. But I try to tend to take people at their word. And so in this case, I think I actually prefer them nerfing Galactus to nerfing Alioth. I genuinely do think there are use cases for Alioth. Like, if they wanted to have a leader arrow style card, Alioth is probably the least offensive of the options, right? Like, Alioth is the least offensive of the leader arrow style priority game winner type cards. And I think if they wanted to do that, they did accomplish the goal. It's just, it's incredibly offensive with Galactus, so I'm glad they just hit Galactus a little bit. As for Loki, look, I gotta say, they cited Kitty Pryde's potential synergy with future cards, Elsa Bloodstone, and I think that might be a bigger reason for this, but I am just devastated to see her get nerfed, man. Like, she's just my favorite card in the game. I love her so much. Like, she's just awesome, and I'm just so sad to see her take another hit here. But I understand there are going to be people out there who are like, oh, Galactus, that was my favorite card in the game. I'm so sad to see it take a hit. So I get it. Different strokes for different folks. Overall, I think this patch is okay. I'm giving it a lot of slack because they did nerf Galactus, basically. I think it's very hard for this patch to get a grade below a B for me, because just the bare minimum is like they hit Galactus. They just knocked that thing out of the park, and so they did, and therefore I think it's a pretty good patch. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I still read every single one of them. Please, if you would, refrain from insulting me. You probably won't, but it would be nice. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next one.